Death row on the move. The transfers Texas doesn't talk about. Before we begin, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, because the story behind Texas death row transfers is something the public almost never sees and was never meant to. In the state of Texas, the prison system is massive, complex, and deeply guarded. But nothing inside it is more secretive than what happens when a death row inmate is moved. There are no public announcements, no posted schedules, no early warnings. Not even officers know the route until minutes before departure. Just a white van, a sealed folder, and a team of officers trained to carry out one of the most controlled movements in American corrections. These transfers happen before sunrise on empty roads, under layers of security that look more like a federal operation than a state prison task. Because one mistake, one wrong turn, one broken routine, one slip in communication could change everything. Inmates on death row aren't moved often, but when they are, it's for reasons the state doesn't talk about. Medical emergencies, court orders, psych evaluations, or high-risk transfers between units. And every trip is a mission, one designed to prevent escapes, prevent interruptions, and prevent the world from seeing how the system really works. This documentary takes you inside those hidden miles, from the moment the door opens on a death row cell to the moment the van disappears onto a restricted Texas highway route. These aren't rumors. These aren't myths. These are the quiet operations that keep the most dangerous system in America running. Welcome to the story Texas doesn't tell. The cell door that opens before dawn, the movement of a death row inmate in Texas never begins with noise. It begins with silence, a kind of heavy, controlled quiet that spreads through the unit long before any door actually opens. Inside the Pulaski unit, where Texas houses its death row population, routine is everything. Lights, counts, meals, showers, movement. Every minute is accounted for. It's predictable until the morning it isn't. Because on the day a death row inmate is scheduled for transfer, the entire system shifts just slightly, almost too quietly to notice. But the men inside feel it immediately. The signs inmates notice before officers say a word, before an officer gives an order, before the paperwork is signed, before a van engine even starts outside, death row inmates can sense when a transfer is coming. Not because someone tells them, but because death row runs on patterns, and patterns don't break without purpose. In the hours before dawn, the lights come on 5 minutes earlier than usual. The hallway doors open with a different rhythm. The keys jingle in a sequence that doesn't match the normal count route. None of these changes are dramatic, but to the men who live behind steel doors, they're unmistakable. One inmate once said, "Transfers are quiet. You don't hear something happening. You hear something missing." The missing noise is what alerts them. No radio chatter. No officers talking casually. No rolling food carts. Just measured footsteps and whispered orders. To anyone else, it would sound like a slow morning. To the men inside, it sounds like a cell about to open. The team assigned to death row movement, not every officer, can be part of a transfer team. Texas assigns specific staff. Officers trained in high-risk, high-security inmate movement. They arrive early, long before sunrise. They don't park near regular staff. They use a different entrance. They don't speak to other officers unless absolutely necessary. Their gear is checked twice. Their radios are tested 3 times. Their routes are sealed in envelopes they can't open until they're already inside the van. This is not standard prison movement. This is a mission. Everything is designed to happen fast, quietly, and without interruption. And inside the death row wing, these officers have one job: open the door, move the inmate, and leave with no delay. The cell extraction without force, unlike other prisons where extractions can be noisy and chaotic. Texas death row transfers rarely involve force. Force creates chaos. Chaos creates danger. Danger slows down movement. Texas avoids at all costs. When an inmate is chosen for transfer, 3 officers position themselves outside the door. 1 for verbal control, 1 for restraints, 1 for paperwork, and escort alignment. They don't shout. They don't threaten. They don't speak unless necessary. The door opens. The inmate is ordered to stand, and restraint are applied to food slot first, wrists, then waist chain, then ankles. Every movement is controlled, rehearsed, efficient. The officer issuing orders uses the same tone every time. Calm, firm, emotionless. Because emotion has no place in a hallway where one mistake can spark a chain reaction. Why they move before sunrise, Texas doesn't move death row inmates during daytime for one reason. Visibility is risk. Cars on the highway. People in parking lots. Civilian employees entering the unit. Public roads with unpredictable traffic. Early morning darkness eliminates 90% of these risks. The roads are empty. Interference is almost zero. The van can leave without anyone noticing. And inside the unit, officers can escort the inmate through silent hallways without crossing paths with other prisoners or staff. This is why transfers start between 3:45 a.m. and 5:15 a.m., a window chosen because the world is asleep. The walk through the quietest hallway in Texas once restrained. The inmate is escorted out of his cell by 3 officers in a triangle formation. One in front, one behind, one at the side. The walk is slow, deliberate, and almost ritualistic. Every door the team passes through is remotely controlled by a supervisor watching on a monitor. No door opens without approval. No step is taken without confirmation. Each hallway becomes a checkpoint. Each checkpoint becomes part of a route designed to keep the inmate from seeing other prisoners or civilian staff. This is not to protect the inmate. It's to protect the operation. Texas doesn't risk interference. Not from other inmates. Not from unexpected movement. Not from anyone watching who shouldn't. The fewer eyes on a death row transfer, the safer the system remains. And as the inmate is brought deeper into the building, toward the rear transport gate, the truth becomes clear. Texas doesn't just control death row movement. Texas hides it. The van waiting in the dark behind the last steel doors is the most important piece of the operation. A plain, unmarked white van. No sirens. No decals. No prison markings. No spotlight. To the outside world, it looks like any other state vehicle. But inside, reinforced shackles lock steel cage GPS blackout protection, and a sealed transport log 2 highway officers sit in front. 2 transport officers sit in the rear compartment. No one speaks unless they must. No music. No radio chatter. Only the sound of the engine idling in the dark. This is how a death row movement begins. Quietly, precisely, and without a single witness outside the walls. And as the inmate is loaded into the van, buckled into reinforced restraints, and the rear doors close, the most guarded road trip in America begins. The road Texas doesn't mark on any map the moment the rear doors of the transport van close. The world outside still sleeps. But inside that van, the most controlled movement in the Texas prison system is underway. Unlike movies or TV shows, Texas does not move death row inmates with flashing lights or convoys racing down highways. There are no sirens, no escorts weaving through traffic, no announcements to local law enforcement. The entire strategy revolves around silence, invisibility, and unpredictability, because the safest transfer is the one nobody knows is happening. The secret route envelope Texas transport officers don't know the route before the van departs, not even the driver. Instead, the route is sealed inside a thick manila envelope handed to the transport commander only after the inmate is secured inside the vehicle. This envelope contains the approved roads, alternate detours, emergency stop locations, restricted radio channels, codes for reporting status, and the timeline checkpoints. They must meet. The envelope stays sealed until the van clears the final internal gate. Once that gate locks behind them, only then does the commander break the seal. Officers later describe the moment as, once the envelope opens, the mission begins. Before that, nobody knows anything. This prevents leaks, prevents preparation, prevents anyone inside or outside from predicting the path. Because the greatest threat to a high-risk transfer is predictability. No convoys, no escorts, no attention. Most people imagine an armored convoy with police escorts. Texas does the opposite. A single unmarked van blends into early morning traffic better than a convoy of law enforcement vehicles. When people see flashing lights, they pay attention. When they see a plain white van, they forget it exists. That's the entire strategy, hiding in plain sight. Only in extremely rare circumstances, such as moving multiple high-risk inmates at once, would a trailing unit be added. But even then, it would stay far back, out of view, so the van appears alone. The goal is not to intimidate. The goal is to disappear. Internal GPS, external silence inside the van. Officers track their location through a secure internal GPS system that is not connected to public satellites. Outside the van, nothing identifies their position. No GPS ping, no visible route, no real-time tracking, no radio chatter mentioning death row, no messages that reveal direction. The van moves like any other state vehicle traveling at the speed limit. Slow, consistent, unremarkable, and to any unsuspecting driver passing them on the highway, the officers look like workers heading to a job site. They have no idea the person in the back is shackled from waist to ankles, locked inside one of the most secure transport cages in the country. The first checkpoint, clearing the silent mile. Every Texas prison has something officers call the silent mile. It's the stretch of road between the rear exit gate and the first public highway. This mile is designed to detect trailing vehicles, suspicious cars parked nearby, people waiting at odd hours, and anyone attempting to approach the van. Officers are trained to drive slow enough to observe, but fast enough to avoid stopping unless the system requires it. The silent mile is where transports are most alert, because any threat would appear here first. Only once they reach the highway does the mission settle into a controlled rhythm. The inmate's view, nothing but darkness inside the back of the van. The inmate sees almost nothing. There are no windows, no mirrors, no view of the outside world, just the dim interior lights, the reinforced steel cage, and the hum of tires on the road. He can't see where he's going. He can't hear where he is. He can't track distance or direction. Texas designs transports this way intentionally, because information is power, and a death row inmate cannot have any power during movement. Some inmates later described the experience as a long ride through nowhere. Others said, "You don't know if you're going north, south, or straight into the ground. All you feel is motion." And motion inside a steel cage is a reminder you're leaving one world but not entering freedom. Why Texas chooses backroads over highways. Most death row transfers don't use major interstates. Instead, they rely on farm-to-market roads, rural two-lane routes, industrial corridors, county backroads. Restricted access service road highways are too predictable, too open, too exposed. Backroads offer more control, more privacy, more unpredictability. If someone wanted to target or intercept a transport, which is extremely rare, they'd have no idea which road to choose. This unpredictability is intentional. Texas doesn't choose the safest path. It chooses the quietest one. The mid-route radio check halfway through every transport. There's a mandatory radio check with a secure operator at headquarters. But there's a rule. You do not speak freely on the radio during a death row transfer. Instead, officers use coded phrases: route green, status 1, clock point matched, no deviation. These phrases reveal nothing about location, road name, travel direction, or timing. The operator simply acknowledges and logs it. If a van misses its check-in window by more than 90 seconds, an internal alert is triggered. A missed window means something has gone wrong, a breakdown, an unexpected stop, a communications failure, or, in the absolute worst scenario, interference. But in most cases, the window is hit perfectly, because the routes Texas chooses are designed to avoid everything that might cause delay. The most guarded moment. Arriving at the destination. Here's the part most people don't understand. The moment the van arrives at another facility is statistically the most dangerous moment of the operation. Not because the inmate is a threat, but because movement creates vulnerability. Only a few people know when the van will arrive. Only a few people are authorized to open the gates. This prevents ambush, prevents escape attempts, prevents civilians from being nearby. When the van arrives, the receiving team is already waiting, gates locked behind the vehicle. The transfer is logged immediately. The inmate is moved directly indoors. The operation ends the moment the new cell door closes. Everything is timed. Everything is coordinated. Everything is controlled. It is the end of the most unseen security operation Texas performs. And yet, the real reasons behind each transfer remain hidden. Some inmates are moved because of security issues. Some because of medical concerns. Some due to court orders, and some because the system needs to keep death row unpredictable. But the public rarely learns why each transfer happened. Because the one thing Texas protects more than anything else is the secret behind the moves themselves. The moment the prison knows someone is coming when a death row inmate is on the move in Texas, only a handful of people know where the van is going. But at the receiving facility, whether it's another maximum security unit, a medical center, or a courthouse, the signs of an incoming transfer appear long before the van arrives. Not through announcements, not through alarms, but through subtle changes in routine that officers and inmates can sense instantly. Because when a death row van is approaching, the entire facility shifts into a different mode. The first signal, the yard goes silent no matter what prison a death row transfer is headed toward. The outside areas always reveal the first clue. Recreation yards close earlier than usual. Movement freezes. No one is brought to the hallways. Civilian staff are told to stay inside offices. Gate officers stand a little straighter, checking the perimeter more frequently. The inmates notice too. They call it the shift in the air. Everything slows down. Everything tightens. Everything becomes more controlled. Even inmates in general population, far from death row, know the signs. Someone's coming. It's a transfer day. Something's moving through the system. This isn't fear. It's simply the quiet recognition that the most secure form of inmate movement is underway. And in Texas, nothing changes a prison's rhythm like a death row arrival. The second signal, the hallway lockdown inside the facility. Hallways that normally bustle with morning movement suddenly empty out. The floors are freshly buffed. Officers stand at key positions. Doors that are usually open become sealed. Escort teams line up at specific checkpoints. It's not chaos. It's precision. Texas prisons aren't just locking down for safety. They're controlling every possible variable. No surprises. No unexpected interactions. No one out of place. The environment becomes so still that you can hear every boot step from the end of the corridor. That stillness has a purpose. When a death row inmate arrives, nobody else moves. The receiving team prepares in silence death row. Receiving teams are some of the most experienced officers in the system. Their preparation is methodical. Restraints are double-checked clipboards, are prepared intake logs, are open radios, are switched to secure channels doors, are tested for proper lock cameras, are moved to cover every angle. They don't speak unless necessary. Not because they're afraid, but because silence prevents mistakes. Every step has to be right. Every detail has to be exact. One officer once described the preparation as, like setting up for a landing. Everything has to be perfect before the wheels touch down. And when the receiving door opens, they must be ready. The third signal. The van enters the blind zone. Every prison has a blind zone, a section outside the perimeter where cameras cannot see the road approaching. The transport van always enters this zone without warning. No horn, no radio call, no early notice. Just a faint hum of its engine approaching the rear gate. The officers inside the receiving unit don't know the exact minute it will arrive, but they know the sound of the van. Slow, steady, unmistakable. The moment the engine is heard, the unit goes completely still. Officers straighten their stance. Inmates fall silent in their cells. Supervisors step toward the camera monitors. Because once the van is heard, the next 90 seconds decide everything. The rear gate procedure. The van pulls into the sally port, a secure holding area between two lock gates. Doors do not open right away. First, the outer gate locks the engine as turned off security checks confirm no trailing vehicles. The inner gate remains sealed until clearance is given, only then do the doors open. The transport commander steps out first, holding the route log. The receiving lieutenant verifies the paperwork. No speaking, just silent checks. Then comes a moment the entire operation is built around. The opening of the van's rear doors. This is the most sensitive moment of the transfer. Not because anyone expects trouble, but because any movement involving transfers carries responsibility. For the inmate, for the officers, and for security of the facility. The inmate touches ground for the first time when the inmate steps out. Their hands are restrained, their waist chain is tight, their ankles are secured. An escort officer holds each arm. There's no force. There's no rush, just a controlled step down from metal to pavement. For a few seconds, the inmate stands still, not allowed to look around, not allowed to speak. Then the receiving officer gives a simple command: move. They walk in a perfect formation with officers at the front, sides, and rear. No one looks at the inmate. No inmate inside the facility can see who is arriving. No civilians are anywhere near the area. This is movement without visibility. Texas designed it that way on purpose. The final door before intake at the end of the secure corridor sits the intake room, the final stop of the transfer. When the inmate enters, restraints stay on until documented officers switch positions according to protocol. Supervisors sign off on the transport custody level. Is reevaluated. The inmate is then taken to a new cell only when the new cell door shuts. With a loud, echoing metallic thud, is the transfer officially complete. The entire movement might take hours, but the final moment takes only seconds. For the officers, it's another mission executed. For the inmate, it's another cell in another part of Texas. For the system, it's another secret operation the public never sees. And while Texas transfers don't involve excitement or chaos, their silence is what makes them so powerful. Because the most guarded operations in America aren't loud. They're invisible. The hidden reasons Texas moves death row inmates: most people believe a death row inmate is moved only once, from the courtroom to the prison to the execution chamber. But in Texas, that isn't the full story. Some men on death row are moved multiple times during their sentence, and every movement is hidden behind layers of procedures the public rarely hears about. Not because the system is doing anything illegal, but because the reasons behind each transfer reveal how complex, fragile, and carefully controlled the death row system truly is. In this chapter, we focus on why Texas transfers death row inmates, the real reasons, the quiet reasons, the ones the public never sees. And none of them have anything to do with drama or escape attempts. Reason 1, medical movement under tight control. Death row inmates age. Some develop chronic conditions. Some need emergency evaluations. Some require treatment at hospital units equipped for inmates with severe health issues. But Texas will never broadcast that a death row inmate is being moved for medical care. Why? Because medical transport creates vulnerability. So instead of using ambulances or civilian hospitals, Texas relies on prison medical centers, secure inpatient wings, transport hospitals built specifically for inmates. These facilities sit behind layers of fencing and controlled access, far from the public eye. When a death row inmate needs medical attention, the van is dispatched before sunrise. Staff are notified individually. Civilian workers are kept out of hallways. Receiving clinics prepare for controlled intake. No one outside sees it. No one hears about it. It never appears on medical news or local reports. Because medical movement isn't about publicity. It's about continuity. Reason 2, court-ordered appearances. Texas courts occasionally require a death row inmate to appear in person. Hearings, appeals, reviews, mental health evaluations, competency checks. Despite modern technology, some judges still insist on physical presence. To the public, these hearings look simple, a few hours in a courtroom. But internally, they trigger days of preparation. Court transfers require special escort teams secure courthouse entrances, closed hallways, controlled waiting rooms, limited public access. The inmate never enters from front, never sees the public, never uses civilian hallways. The entire movement is planned to the minute, then wiped from public record. Because court appearances are the one moment where the outside world could see the inside of the system. Texas minimizes that completely. Reason 3, security reclassification. Texas doesn't leave a death row inmate in the same location forever. Every inmate undergoes periodic classification reviews, assessments of behavior, mental state, communication, habits, risk level, medical needs. If anything changes, even slightly, Texas may move them, not as punishment, not as reward, but to restore internal balance. Some moves involve special observation units, quiet cells, medical observation areas, higher security rooms, protective separation. These moves are quiet, unannounced, often completed before the sun rises. One officer described it like this: sometimes you don't move the inmate because of what he did. You move him because of what the unit needs. And in a system as sensitive as death row, small changes in environment matter. Reason 4. Unit-level infrastructure issues. Texas prisons are old. Some are more than 100 years old. Equipment breaks. Pipes fail. A wing needs repair. An electrical system needs inspection. A water line fails overnight. When this happens, inmates, including death row inmates, may need temporary relocation. These are some of the quickest transfers the system ever performs. Short notice, no advance announcement, immediate dispatch, minimal staff, direct unit-to-unit movement, not for drama, not for punishment, for safety. A minor infrastructure issue for most inmates becomes a critical situation for those on death row. Texas fixes it by moving fast and quietly. Reason 5. Internal investigative needs. Sometimes a move is triggered for investigative reasons, not because of the inmate, but because of concerns around a unit environment. Examples include inappropriate communications, unauthorized contact between inmates, suspicious mail patterns, concerns about staff behavior, internal audits, or simple precaution. When this happens, the inmate is moved before dawn into a location the state believes will keep them isolated from the investigation. It's not punishment. It's containment of information. This part of the system is never discussed publicly, not because something sinister is happening, but because investigations require quiet, very quiet. Reason 6. Transfers to the execution unit. This is the final movement, the one the public knows the least about, the one with the strictest rules. When an inmate's date approaches, Texas moves them from the Pulaski unit to the Huntsville unit, the location where executions occur. This movement is the most controlled of all. No noise, no announcements, no visible movement, no interactions with any other prisoner. Officers describe the atmosphere during these moves as calm, heavy, and respectful. No drama, no spectacle, just procedure. The final transfer in a system built on secrecy and silence. The truth behind all these reasons, none of these transfers are random. None of them are careless. None of them are routine. Every single one requires specialized officers, restricted access, sealed routes, invisible timing, and complete secrecy, because when Texas moves a death row inmate, the stakes are higher than any other operation in the system, not because they expect danger, but because they cannot risk even the possibility of it. Transfers are not an afterthought. Transfers are the backbone of how the system stays operational, stable, and safe. And each reason, whether medical, legal, investigative, or infrastructural, reveals something deeper. Texas does not just confine death row inmates. Texas manages them, silently, precisely, and always out of the public eye. Inside the most guarded transfer in America, by the time a death row transfer reaches its final destination, the public still has no idea that anything happened. No news alert, no report, no mention of movement. Texas designs these operations so perfectly that a full mission can happen without a single outside witness. But the end of a transfer is not just the moment a van stops. It is the moment the system performs the most important task of all, reclaiming absolute control. Because a transfer is only truly complete when the inmate is fully secured, the paperwork is verified, and the prison returns to its normal rhythm as if nothing ever occurred. This chapter reveals the final steps, the ones even correctional officers rarely talk about. The hallway that only opened for one person when the van arrives at the new unit. The inmate is escorted through a hallway that almost no one else uses. Not general population, not trustees, not civilian staff, not officers on regular rotation. This corridor exists for one purpose: high-risk movement. It's usually shorter than standard hallways, better lit under heavier camera coverage, lined with reinforced doors guarded at 2 or 3 checkpoints. Texas built these corridors because the most vulnerable moment in the whole operation is a walk from the van to the cell. During these seconds, officers are focused, tense, and silent. Every sound in the hallway echoes. Every step is calculated. Even the inmate can feel the difference. The air is cooler, the lighting sharper, the silence deeper. This is where the transfer becomes real. The paperwork that decides everything before the inmate goes to a new cell. The transfer commander and the receiving lieutenant perform a verification process that is almost ritualistic. They confirm inmate identity, reason for transfer, custody, level, medical status, restraint condition, behavioral notes, route completion timestamps. From each checkpoint, this paperwork is not formality. It is protection. One mistake in documentation could mean a delayed return trip, an unnecessary investigation, or a breach in chain of custody Texas avoids that at all costs. Only when every detail is signed and sealed do officers say the words that close the operation: transfer complete. But for the inmate, the moment is still far from over. A new cell, a new silence once paperwork is final. The escort team leads the inmate to the new cell. They do not pass other inmates. They do not cross open hallways. They do not interact with general population. Everything is controlled. When they reach the assigned cell, the door is open remotely. The inmate enters restrained stay on until the officers step back. The door shuts the lock, engages cameras, record the final seconds the door shuts with a deep metallic echo, a sound every officer recognizes as the end of the mission. Some inmates sit immediately. Some stand still. Some look around the new cell with no expression. Most say nothing, because transfers aren't about emotion. They're about continuity. A new cell, a new routine, a new clock ticking forward. But the system remains unchanged. What happens after the door closes once the inmate is secured? The officers walk away as quietly as they arrived. There is no applause, no recognition, no announcement. The hallway returns to its empty silence. The cameras shift back to regular angles. The escort team leaves the unit without speaking. The prison returns to normal. To the rest of the world, nothing happened. To the officers, another mission completed. To the inmate, another step deeper into the system. To Texas, another control movement that preserves order. And that is the truth about death row transfers. They are invisible not because Texas hides them, but because Texas designs them to be unnoticeable. The part the public never sees while documentaries and news stories focus on trials, sentences, and executions, the movements in between are what truly keep the system running. Transport is the backbone of everything. Medical care, court appearances, safety concerns, facility maintenance, investigations, classification, reviews, the final trip to the Huntsville unit. Without transfers, the system would collapse. But because transfers are invisible, the public never sees how much precision and discipline they require. One officer once said, "You can run a prison wrong for a day. You can't move a death row inmate wrong for even a minute." That is why Texas invests more planning, more secrecy, and more oversight into movement than almost any other operation. Because the road between two prisons is not just pavement. It is the tightrope the entire system depends on. The truth behind the silence Texas doesn't dramatize death row transfers. It doesn't record them for public review. It doesn't broadcast them to the media. Not because there's anything illegal happening, but because visibility invites risk. And risk is the one thing Texas refuses to allow in the most guarded part of its system. Every door that opens, every mile the van travels, every signature on the paperwork is part of a system built on one principle: control without attention, security without noise, movement without visibility. This is why the public rarely hears about these transfers. It's not a conspiracy. It's the design. Because the safest system is the one nobody sees moving. Death row on the move. The transfers Texas doesn't talk about. When a death row transfer ends, nothing inside the prison celebrates it. No announcements. No congratulations. No reminders of what just happened. The van is parked. The paperwork is filed. The inmate is locked into a new cell. And the world continues as if the operation never existed. Because that's the point. Texas doesn't move death row inmates with spectacle. It moves them with silence, precision, and invisibility. The three principles that keep the most guarded part of the system functioning without interruption. To the public, death row looks like a row of cells frozen in time. But behind the scenes, movement is constant. Medical trips, court appearances, classification changes, security shifts, facility needs, and the final transfer to Huntsville. These movements never appear on the news. They never show up in reports. They never trend online. But every one of them is a mission, planned to the minute, executed before sunrise, and carried out by teams trained to vanish into ordinary roads and silent hallways. Inside the system, officers know the truth. Prison isn't held together by walls. It's held together by the movements the world never sees. The quiet van at dawn, the sealed envelope with the route, the empty hallway cleared for one inmate, The final door clicking shut. These are the invisible threads that keep the entire structure balanced. And the silence is not accidental. It's engineered. Because when the stakes are this high, when every step must be controlled, every minute accounted for, every route unpredictable, noise becomes the enemy. So the system chooses silence. This is a part of American corrections that documentaries rarely show, reporters rarely uncover, and the public rarely understands. But now you've seen behind the curtain. Not the dramatized version, the real one. The one built on discipline, secrecy, and early morning roads that carry the weight of a system few people ever witness. Thank you for watching Death Row on the Move, the transfers Texas doesn't talk about. Like, comment, and subscribe if you want more true, unseen prison operations the world was never supposed to notice.